Still. And go.
Good morning. Hello and welcome to today's Back to Basics. I'm Rico Burton and I volunteer with AARP Arizona. AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. And with a nationwide presence of nearly 38 million members across the nation, and approximately 900,000 of those members right here in Arizona, AARP strengthens communities and advocates for what matters most to families: health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. Now, this month, as in last month as well, we're focusing on healthy living, and we want to amplify the call to action for the 50 plus community to develop healthy habits for mental well being. As the country continues to grapple with the ebbs and flows still of COVID-19, pandemic has really gotten us, and many people are eager to move into a sense of some kind of normalcy. We still have to be careful. Many in the 50 plus community have developed coping mechanisms that show a strong sense of resiliency and the need to anchor themselves. Ongoing public health concerns, economic issues, and global conflicts are still weighing on everyone. By covering these topics, we've covered sleep, stress management, healthy eating, and exercise. AARP demonstrates what its healthy living offerings can help Americans develop and maintain healthy habits for their mental well being. There are a lot of resources, and you're going to see one of the URLs come across the screen to help you get there. Today, we are going to talk about mental health. And today joins us also Coach SheriAnne. How are you?
I'm good, Lady B. How are you?
I won't complain. Thanks for asking. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you again. Yes, mental health is one of those topics that we're talking more and more about. And the more resources I see out there for people, I'm so grateful, because it's one of those things that people just in the past didn't talk about very much. And due to your background, I'm really excited for this conversation today, because it will be a conversation, because you have a lot of knowledge about it. And so being a counselor and whatnot. So I'm excited about this. And so there was an organization, Brain and Behavior Research Foundation, back in 2013, started the whole no science, no stigma front. And that was really to just educate people on understanding that there's a lot of science behind mental illness. And it's not just someone chooses to be that way, or they're just that way genetically, or there's so much stigma around it. And so trying to really work at removing that stigma by educating people on the science of our brain. Mm-hmm. And so I really appreciate it. And so it's been around since 2013. There's actually a Facebook page called No Science, No Stigma. And so if you're looking for a place to go to understand more, and you're watching us here on AARP's Facebook page, when we're done here, go to the No Science, No Stigma Facebook page and see what they have as a resource. There's also books out there on it. And so, because a lot of people are suffering from mental illness. It's one in five.
Absolutely. And for those who join us, please be sure to put your questions in the comments. We'll try to get to them. Say hello and let us know where you're from as well.
All right. Oh, yes, ahead. Please do. I love seeing where people tune in from. Because the more we talk about it, the more we remove the stigma. That's one of the biggest things, is just communicating about it and taking that stigma away. Because even children, because of COVID, there's so many kids that are rising to the surface with a lot of mental illnesses, and anxiety, and depression. There was a lot of anxiety that came out from COVID, which stemmed from fear. And so how do we reduce that stigma? What do we do to reduce the stigma? What would you say?
Well, let me ask you a different question. What are the stigmas?
Oh gosh, there's judgment. People have a lot of it is judgment. There's a lot of shame, and there shouldn't be shame. There should never be shame. It should be a lot of empowerment. And so but it's not knowing the facts. So people have opinions. And so a lot of it's just the judgment. That's where stigma kind of stems from. And so it's having a healthy dialogue about it. I think that's the biggest thing. Knowing the facts, and not making assumptions. And that's where resources online can come into play, using counselors, using doctors, that will help with knowing the facts. being aware of your attitude towards it and having more of an open heart, towards people that are suffering from mental illness.
Mhm.
And, and just focusing on the positive. That can be a huge thing, getting educated and, just choosing your words very carefully. That's another thing that I learned. And so, because my daughter, who is now 19 and a half, like we discovered early on that she was suffering from a severe amount of anxiety, and then it was married with some depression. And I haven't really had anxiety. I might have anxiety like with certain things, but it doesn't encompass my entire life and it doesn't paralyze me. And some people are become incredibly paralyzed by anxiety. So I had to learn a lot. She was in middle school when it kind of surfaced, and the resources really weren't there through the school system back, 6 years ago. And so now things are becoming more and more available to parents. And a great organization is NAMI. I'm sure you've heard of NAMI. It's National Alliance of Mental Illness. I found a lot of resources there. But in order for me to remove the stigma, because at first I missed my child and I loved her and I was hurting for her, but I was also frustrated. I found myself very, very frustrated because I couldn't relate to it. And I had to learn to remove my own stigma about it, my own judgment, my own fears also, and educate myself and really change my language. And so I think changing your language and choosing your words carefully helps tremendously, not only for yourself if you're suffering from mental illness, but helping the other people. And instead of saying, bipolar is a mental illness, instead of saying I'm bipolar, you say I have bipolar. You are not your illness. It's just something that's happening to you. Don't let it identify you. And if you're talking to people, that have mental illness, it's not their identity. It's just something that they're facing and dealing with and moving through. So choosing words carefully and using the proper language is so huge.
Part of what I think about when I consider stigmas too is a lot of it comes from lack of knowledge. And when you don't know, we have what's called uncertainty reduction. And we try to fill in the blanks so that we can feel comfortable around people. So when we see people, and we do it in all kind of ways, it's part of our perception process that many of us do. We see people, they look a certain way or act a certain way. They must be this, or they must be from here. All of those things come into play because we want to feel comfortable and we take ourselves out of the equation of other people. So when we look at some of the schools, and when this happened at such a young age to your daughter, I imagine not all teachers were ready for this or equipped for this because they didn't understand. I think about students that go to school in some of the more marginalized and disenfranchised communities where they could be suffering from something like this and it's deemed to be bad behavior, or they have some kind of learning disability versus something else, because and then that just adds to additional stigma. I don't want to be labeled this way. I don't want it in my file if I go to a counselor that says, oh my gosh, have you ever seen a mental health professional? Does this mean I won't get a job later on? There's a lot of stigma. People with religion that have religious beliefs may just believe I just need to pray this away, right? And so there's a lot of things that go along, not for our young people all the way through to our 50 plus. And so, yes, the stigmas are real. And I think breaking those down and recognizing them first is going to be the big thing. So thank you for sharing what you're sharing. I know that, like you say, you've done a lot of research and you've experienced this. So I know you have more to tell us. Go ahead.
No, but it's so true though. It's just not knowing. And when we don't know, people immediately jump to a place of fear. And so then they fill that fear with stigmas and judgments, and because they just want to make themselves feel comfortable. And not knowing is okay. Let's go educate ourselves about it and let's talk about it. And because a lot of people are suffering from it, and some people will have mental illnesses just due to a chemical imbalance, and we'll jump into that, chemical imbalance in their brain, and they can get on medications to get that balance back in place, and they can move out of that mental illness. And then there's some people that just will have it, and it's something that they have to navigate and work through their entire life, and they have tools. There's so much therapy out there, and that can help give you a toolbox, I call it. And so as my daughter was going through therapy, we would talk about it afterwards and go, hey, we're just filling this toolbox with tools for you to be able to use when you are confronted with issues that sends you down a spiraling path of anxiety and depression so that you can pull yourself out of it, um, and there's so many overlapping mental illnesses that can come about, like anxiety and depression can also lead into OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, because that brings comfort to people when they can create order for themselves. But it's just so interesting to me that, when people have a physical ailment or a physical injury, something that you can see, it's so easy to go to a doctor and be like, I need help with this. But when you have an internal illness, such as a mental illness, something that you can't see and, have black and white lines around it, like how it's hard to talk about. And it's just important to find a community, a counselor. When I say community, I mean like your home, people in your home, your family that you can talk to about it, because you got to start talking about it, because it's not talking about it just perpetuates it. But it's just sad to me that it's difficult for people just to start the conversation.
Well, for many people, it's personal.
Mm-hmm.
And the stigmas don't lie just outside, they lie within. Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I going to always be like this? You mentioned you are not this, but we take on that. We associate it with who we are. And that can be very, very problematic as well. And so there's a lot to overcome, not just dealing with the illness, but how it makes a person feel, and their self-esteem and their self-concept. All of those things become impacted by this. And so the road is not an easy one. So when we say we need to talk about it, it's hard sometimes. And then of course, if you're the one with the illness and you're talking with your family, they're talking about you. So you're sitting up here looking and say, everybody talking about me, right? And so
Yep.
it's not always comfortable, which brings us to that place where we say people have to come from a loving place. And sometimes it's not always about asking questions. People may be getting the help they need. It's about loving on people, loving them where they are on the way to where they're going,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Well, and it's because there's a lot of shame, and that shame comes from within first. You first feel shameful of yourself, because we all think, we're all our own worst critic. First of all, we all are
yes.
our very own worst critic. So there's shame that comes when you don't feel like when you have an illness that you can't really define. If you can define a physical ailment, then that's, not shaming, but a mental one that you can't really define, there comes a lot of shame with that. And it's, so you have to shift the mindset if this is happening to you directly. And that's really challenging. And that's where, if you don't have a toolbox, really finding a counselor, group counseling, even sometimes, to get that toolbox so that you can shift your mindset from being shameful to empowerment and understanding that you're not alone. I think most people that are battling mental illnesses think that they're alone, that they're the only one that is suffering from it, and they're not. And so having that empowerment and talking about it, think about, by you talking about it, you might help the next person.
Mm-hmm.
You might be the catalyst for them to move past what's holding them back. Because so many people with mental illnesses are frozen, just frozen. And, and so, because sometimes it can be, some mental illnesses are just simply as like, it creates loneliness. There's depression, there's PTSD. And PTSD, was defined, gosh, just a couple of decades ago. It wasn't that long ago where PTSD was actually defined. And it was because of military, that's how it came about. But a lot of people can have PTSD from, a trauma, a very tragic event, can create PTSD. And then their brain, part of their brain is encapsulated in that time, and they just can't break out of it. And when you have PTSD, it's really important to have a proper therapist to help you unbox that, unpackage it, and deal with it, and set it aside to be able to move forward. Because otherwise it just stays there. It just hangs on and it has a grip on you. Bipolar, bipolar is definitely a chemical imbalance in the brain. Like I mentioned earlier, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And this can be, an OCD can have a wide range of how it functions. Like, people can function with OCD, and there's people that cannot function with OCD. And the ones that cannot, it's really sad because they have to do their compulsiveness in order to move forward in that routine of whatever they're doing. Um,
Now, there were 4 areas or 4 specific things you were going to tell us about, weren't there? Areas in the
well,
brain.
the brain chemistry,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
So, and we'll jump into that in a minute. But with and the other one is schizophrenia, which that one definitely requires a proper therapist. That's one that really you can't really get through on your own. You're going to need some help. But it's when you are the one that is suffering from mental illness, and you need a group of people around you, whether it's family, friends, therapists, that can help you move through it and make sure that they're not accommodating you. This is one thing I did learn with my daughter in the sense of helping her move past her mental illnesses. I had to make sure that I wasn't creating situations in our home that was allowing her and accommodating her to stay in those places. And so if you're one that is like me, where you have someone in your family or in your home that has a mental illness, you have to also do some self-evaluation. And you might also have to go get some therapy help yourself, just so that you can have the proper tools to support your loved one that is suffering from mental illness. So, because we're all here talking about people with the mental illness, but then there's the support crew that's helping the person with the mental illness, and they need a toolbox just as well. And that was one thing that I had to learn in the process and go get my own toolbox.
So then how did you find out? I mean, what tests did you go to? What was the process you went through? What should a person do if they feel like something is wrong and it is not something that we can see, like you said, not broken arm or this or that? Where do they start?
You go start with a counselor, and you start with a therapist and a psychologist, and then they will be able to evaluate you and let you know if you need to go see a psychiatrist. You don't have to jump into a psychiatrist right away, because sometimes just going to a psychologist will just be able to, a therapist will be able to help you create your toolbox and start working through. And then if you're still hung up and you can't get through and function with because sometimes the mental illnesses create situations where people are not functioning in a normal way. They're not sleeping right. They can't hold a job. They're isolated. There's so many things that can happen, or they're being dangerous with them. Sometimes obsessive compulsive disorders can be very dangerous. So it's finding someone to give you the tools to work through it. So finding a therapist, and then they will be able to tell you if you need to go see a psychiatrist, because those are the ones that will be able to prescribe a medication for you if you have a brain chemical imbalance. And this is where also knowing the science is really important, because our brains have 4 different chemicals running through them. And mental illness is just very, very complicated, because it's not just one thing. It could be a combination of factors. There could have been a trauma that happened. There can be genetics, can be your environment, can be your lifestyle. It could be just your brain chemistry. So our brain chemistry is very interesting. I know you've heard of all of these things, especially you, Lady B, but even all of our viewers. But we have serotonin. So what is serotonin, Lady B? It's our mood regulator, right?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I'm having fun
So
with it.
that is our happiness, well-being, calm. And how do we get more serotonin? You exercise. Make sure you're getting outside and getting plenty of sunlight. So that's serotonin. Then we have dopamine. So dopamine is also, it's a feel-good, pleasure, motivation. It's what helps with memory and motor skills as well. And the driver for dopamine is it's like you get a hit of dopamine when something good happens. And this can also create addictive behaviors. So if somebody tries drugs and they have a huge dopamine hit, like that's going to make them want to go back to that. So dopamine is kind of our addictive one that can, so having exercise, making sure that you're getting plenty of sleep, eating foods rich in L-tyrosine, which is an amino acid. That helps, L-tyrosine helps create dopamine. So if you're eating the proper foods, getting exercise, then you're not going to be seeking behaviors to get that dopamine hit that are negative. But sometimes you can get a dopamine hit from going and doing something fun, a fun exercise. So Or like for me, rock climbing. Rock climbing is gives me a dopamine hit.
Right. Dopamine it has to do with movement. You have to get out there and move and do something. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And for those people that don't enjoy exercising or aren't used to it, dance. You
Yeah.
do something. Yeah, you can still do something that is fun, that is going to get your body moving and get you in a place where you're going to feel a little happier and you're going to have more of a sense of pleasure. That's what we're looking for there. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Pleasure and motivation.
Yes.
Dopamine is also our motivator one.
Yes.
That's the one that gets us going.
Hmm.
And sometimes you got to kickstart yourself into it. So, but once you do, it's there.
Right.
Then the next one is adrenaline. So adrenaline is our fight or flight. It's the one that keeps you safe, and it's epinephrine. And
Hmm.
so that
Hmm.
one is we need it to survive. But and the beauty about our bodies is once it's released, our body won't continue to release it. So it's like that's why it's a fight or flight, keep you safe. You'll feel your heart rate race. Your breathing will become a little more shallow and rapid. Um, Things like that. So adrenaline would be something like if you almost got in a car accident and all of a sudden you have an adrenaline rush. Um, but the problem with adrenaline, it's not really even a problem, but sometimes when people live in a high stress lifestyle, adrenaline isn't, epinephrine isn't constantly being released, but it is like on a consistent basis, but it does spike. And when that does that, you create situations in your body where cortisol is also being released, and high stress just really depletes your immune system, can make you sick. So managing your adrenals is important. Making sure that you're not getting yourself in a situation where you're in a fight or flight all the time, because your body will wear out.
Okay.
So then the fourth is oxytocin. This is our love hormone. This is the warm and fuzzy one. This one happens from connections, enjoyment activities. You also get oxytocin when you sleep. So oxytocin is making sure that you are getting out there and making some connections with people. Oxytocin is released heavily when you have intercourse. So that's a good one. That one's going to keep you happy.
Listening to music, that's another one. I think about, many people have been quarantined and all the rest. And so that's been a little tough for people to deal with. But listening to music, reaching out, that's one of the beauties of Zoom too. We can reach out to other people. Sometimes we can't always be in their presence, but we can still show up. And we can pick up the telephone and call people, and that's going to be helpful as we start to create those interactions with people. I've heard people say sometime too that they hadn't seen people in so long, and they're starting to get together. It's like, now who do I invite anymore? Who do I, now they're taking a look at their list of people and what they're doing, and trying to figure that out now for some people is a little challenging. So having this nice balance of things that you're talking about is ever so important.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you make sure you're doing self-care. And if your self-care is slipping, that's usually a huge sign that you're battling something, mentally. So pay attention to your self-care, and then pay attention to your connections with other people. Your connections with other people will be a huge indicator as well. And they've even proven that making sure that you have good connections, which I'm excited about because that's our next topic in a couple weeks, but is a great way to create longevity in your life. So we need connection. We are a species that desires connection. And so if you find yourself isolated, feeling lonely, most people don't like to admit that they're depressed. Like when I've talked to people that are fighting depression, they will deny, 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 deny. And it's like, it's okay. Lean into it. Feel empowered by it because you're not alone, especially right now. There's so many people. And it was really interesting because when we were coming out of COVID, like you said, like when I hugged my mom for the first time, I was like, oh, I love you. I don't want to let go.
Right.
We miss that. We need that. And right now with there being another spike, the concerns, people are really concerned back to wearing some masks. We've also heard like other viruses are becoming super viruses because of COVID. So there's that fear that's rising again in people, and it's really important to recognize that it's okay to talk about it. If you're feeling anxious about going out in public, or people are traveling more and being outside more, and if that creates anxiety for you, make sure you are talking about it, so that whether it's with family or with a therapist, so that
Right.
you can, address it appropriately and not let it hold you back. Were
So,
you
so
going to say?
I was going to say too that all depression does not show up in sad faces. You will see people who are smiling, who are laughing, and seemingly the just the life of the party. And then you'll see them at another time, and they're, when they can't hold on to that face anymore, and you'll just notice a little something off, or the light isn't quite in their eyes as it was before, or as you'd like for it to be. We still need to, I guess I'm still talking about loving on people. Just stay connected to people. Ask people, how are you doing? You okay? What can I do to help you? How can I help? Anything you need? You'd be surprised then when people can finally say, oh my gosh, I can relax a minute. I can just really be me and not have to, especially for people who are caregivers. Our teachers, I think about teachers in the classroom. They don't always have a chance to just sit back and be lonely and depressed. They have all these young children to take care of.
Mhm.
Physicians, they
Yes.
too, suffer and go through. So it's not just people that you'll see walking around looking very sullen and all the rest. You can't tell. You can't always tell. And so we have to be mindful. We talked about being mindful, meditating, centering yourself, understanding and being open to understanding how you're feeling, and other people too. Again, just that check in on other people and your close community of folk that you don't mind talking to and sharing with. Now, you talked about going to see people. Now, do these therapists cost, or are there some free
There,
resources?
it's
No.
interesting because I just discovered recently that there's, and I should have written it down. There's more and more resources now, and they're becoming more to where you don't have to go to someone's office. Yes, they do cost, usually therapists do, but there's some online resources that you can access, and groups that you can talk to on social media, like on Facebook. Like if you go to the No Stigma, No Science page.
Right.
Um, but yeah, typically care like that does help because that's their profession. They went to school to be a therapist. They're licensed professionals, so you are paying for their services. But there are resources out there that can help you, like NAMI, like I mentioned earlier. So, but just asking for help, just talking about it is so huge,
Some,
and it is challenging because it's not something that you can see. So, and I say that not knowing that it's challenging to bring it up, and I remember with my daughter, like I was like, just choose differently, just choose, like, and she's like, and she was frozen, like she's like, it's not that easy. And so I know it's not easy, but it's important to just make sure that you have, lock arms with people that can walk with you and help you move in the right direction. And locking arms and not being by yourself is huge. And if you're not the one with the mental illness and you're caring or loving on someone that is with it, just lock arms with them and hold space for them. You can't fix it for them. They have to fix it themselves. There are resources out there for them that they can do that. They can move in that direction. But holding space for someone that is struggling is one of the best gifts that you can give somebody. Just opening up space for them to be able to verbalize it, because sometimes just verbalizing it helps people move through it. But there's certainly no shame in it, and because so many people are suffering from some form of mental illness, and like you said earlier, sometimes you don't even see it, and also the other thing too is sometimes it manifests itself in really interesting ways. Like you might have like gut issues. If you have severe gut issues, your gut is your second brain. So if you're having a lot of gut issues, there's a huge possibility that you're suffering from some anxiety and depression, and it's just manifesting itself right there in your gut.
Absolutely. To our emotions and the way that we talk to people, some of the things we may say, that may be another reason or another way that kind of thing happens. I would
Mhm.
suggest, I know that some insurances cover, going to therapists, others do not, but there are churches who have support groups, and they have information about places you can go. You'll find therapists that attend different organizations that will do some things for free. And
Mhm.
so Google and reach out to find out what's available to you. You'll be very, very surprised. And a lot of places are very confidential too. So you'll want to take a look at that so that you feel comfortable as you're learning to live with this and get through it and work through it. Oh my goodness. Coach SheriAnne, I thank you for being with us today. You have shared some beautiful information, given us a lot of food for thought. And anybody out there, make sure you take care of you as you
Mhm.
learn to also help take care of other people. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much for being with us. God bless.